We're talking about Microsoft now charging $70 for first-party releases, and a few reasons why I personally really don't like it. Now, there's a couple of things we need to address before getting into the meat of this situation, and me wearing a PlayStation Games hat is probably one of them. Look, it is cold in the UK at the moment. If you are watching many UK creators that do on-screen stuff like this, we're cold, we're gonna wrap up warm, most of us are gonna end up looking like the Michelin Man. Get used to it, please. Our energy bills are extortionate. We need to do something to keep warm. On the front of the games themselves, I want to start by talking about the situation of the $70 game, and the fact that I completely understand it. I did a video earlier this year talking about the $70 game as a general. I looked at resources like Glassdoor, Naughty Dog, 343 Industries and Co. to get ideas of average wages of a development team, the average size of a development studio, how much outsourcing and contracting is done, to get an idea of the cost of making a video game. Now, what I came up with was just a personnel issue, a personnel situation, just the wages to create a game, and that's only from the development teams. We're not talking about legal getting involved for copyright and such. We're not talking about overheads such as rent, outsourcing, gas and electricity, all these sort of things. We're not talking about specialist skills to keep these places in good working order and such. We're just talking about the people who make the game getting paid, not even the guys who make them cups of tea sort of thing. And it was a lot of money. You're talking an average wage of $71,000 per developer, per annum, and the average development cycle taking around the 4-year mark at this moment in time. What that means from a wage perspective on a development cycle for a game with a small AAA development studio being around 2,000 people is $444 million on wages alone of just the development staff. That's no other costs involved. That is just development. Now, to break even on that cost, the studio would then need to sell 6.3 million games at that $70 mark. It's a lot. It's a lot of money that we're talking about on wages. And I want to be remunerated correctly for what I do at work, so I want other people to be remunerated correctly for what they do at work. So I understand the need for the $70 game. To put a bit more perspective on it, that $70 game here in the UK is £60. We have been paying £60 for games for a few years now. It used to be that we would take a direct currency translation, so whatever that US price was when things were, say, $60 initially, we were paying £40. But over the last 10 years, that direct currency translation has gone by the wayside a bit, and they've sort of made up their own idea of what different markets should pay. And so here in the UK and across the rest of Europe, our game prices have been gradually increasing for the past decade, whereas the US's have stayed stagnant at that $60. So this is going to be a bigger shock for US audiences than much of the rest of the world. Australia, for example, are used to paying $120 for a game as standard. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. That's a big figure that we're talking about. So this shock factor that people are having, it's very much a US-centric shock. But then we come to the fact of Microsoft charging $70 per game. And I have issues with that. I have no issue with Sony charging $70. I have no issues with if Nintendo wanted to charge $70. I have no issues with the likes of Ubisoft, Take-Two, even Activision Blizzard charging $70 per game. Because that is to remunerate their people correctly, get a little bit of profit so that they can then make the next game. My problem comes with Microsoft because of the narrative that they have produced around the $70 game. 2 years ago, when Sony announced that they were raising the prices of their games for this new generation of console, Microsoft went on a media spree, whether it was in traditional media, whether it was on social media, whether it was in interviews or on podcasts, whatever the case may be, whenever the situation of expensive games came up, Microsoft drove this narrative home that Sony were the bad guys, that $70 games didn't need to happen, that we can still only charge you $60. They are the bad guys. They drove and built and pushed this narrative for 2 whole years before themselves saying, oh yeah, we're going to charge you $70 games for first-party releases. That is my biggest issue with this entire situation. The narrative that Microsoft built around it. They told us they wouldn't do this. They told us that if people were charging $70 per game, that they were the bad guys. Would I have been happy paying $70 for Halo Infinite? No, I wouldn't. I don't think that is a $60 game, let alone a $70 game. But that's down to the quality of the release, not the fact that those people need to be paid for the work that they've done. There's always the option as a consumer, if I buy a game, I can take it back to the store, take it back to the retailer, and get my money back. That is true for physical releases wherever. Most digital releases give you a 2-hour window where if you don't like the game, you can return it as well. You have options as a consumer. But Microsoft made this narrative. They made the $70 game the bad guy. They made anybody who charged $70 for a game the bad guy. And now they're doing it themselves. But is there a need for Microsoft and Xbox to charge $70 per game? On the one hand, yes. And on the other hand, no. On that no side, let's start with that negative. Microsoft are the 3rd richest company on the planet. They only trail an oil giant and another tech company in Apple. They have got $1.9 trillion in the bank. None of us can comprehend what that means. But to put it in perspective, Sony's entire worth is $99 billion. You need to go a few billions more to start to break even with what Microsoft have. Microsoft can subsidize $10 per game. They could have that narrative that they've been pushing for the past 2 years, drive it home and live it by subsidizing $10 per game. Because they're not selling that many games. Because of Game Pass. Game Pass allows people to come in, pay currently $14 per month, upping to around the $20-25 some point in 2023 we expect, and they can get the exact same gaming experiences on their console, on the PC, or even on the cloud. I played Halo Infinite on an Android tablet, for example, for 10 quid. That's 10 Great British pounds, 14 US dollars. I played a AAA game. And that then becomes the other side of this coin. If they're pushing the prices of their first-party games up, but they also have Game Pass sitting there, which I can sign up for a month at will, and then cancel at the end of that month at will. Where is the impetus to go out and buy a physical copy of these games? Because the first-party titles don't leave the service. It's not like The Medium, for example, where that started on Game Pass and then left it. If you want to play The Medium on Xbox now, you have to go buy that game. Ironically, you can get The Medium on PlayStation Plus at no additional charge to what you're paying for your annual fee. But all of the Xbox first-party games, all of the Gears of Wars, all of the Forzas, all of the Halos, all of the Fables, all of these first-party titles will remain on Game Pass until Game Pass is no longer a thing. So why up the price when people aren't going to be paying that anyway? But that's then the other side of that coin. That's where the yes bit comes in, where they need to be charging $70 per game because they're simply not shifting the quantities of all of their competitors. If you look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, that is one of the best-selling games of 2022, and by the time I'm making this video, it's only been out for 1 month. 4 weeks total, and it's one of the best-selling games of 2022. Here in the UK, those games cost £40 each. And they have more than made their money back. They are in massive profit from the sales figures that they have, because they're shifting the quantities. If you look at Their direct console competitor in PlayStation, God of War Ragnarok, which has been out for 5 weeks by the time I'm making this video, that has already entered into profitability. When you take into consideration developers' wages, overheads, and all of the additional expenses that go with making, marketing, and releasing a game, God of War is already at a point where it's making profit. Because they are shifting that quantity. They have shifted over 10 million copies of that game. They are making profit. Halo Infinite, we don't have sale numbers for. Bearing in mind, Halo Infinite was the last first-party release from Xbox Studios, and that was in December 2021. We don't have sales numbers for it. We know over 20 million people have played it. But how many of those 20 million people were like me and experienced it through Game Pass? How many of those 20 million people are like me and experienced it on a device that has nothing to do with Microsoft? 20 million is a really nice number to put on something, to say this many people have played the game. But if those 20 million people aren't paying a full price entry, what sort of profit are you then making? And if you consider that with Game Pass, for example, that one subscription gets you access to over 400 games, how far is the profit that they're making from Game Pass being split between additional and third-party developers? So I do understand there's a need to charge the $70 per game, because Xbox just aren't shifting the quantities in sales figures as their competitors because of their current business structure. But Microsoft are the third richest company on the planet. Their competitors in Sony and Nintendo, they don't even break the top 20. And Microsoft sit at third. Microsoft have got more money than they know how to spend. They have put an offer on the table to buy Activision Blizzard that is worth 2/3 of what the entirety of Sony is worth. Not Sony Playstation, Sony as a whole. We're talking movies, animation, televisions, audio, Alpha Series cameras. You know, the cameras that most YouTubers who aren't me and do all of this with a mobile phone use. Sony Mobile, Sony Playstation, all of these factors and more, all of these departments rolled in together, 2/3 of their entire value is what Microsoft have put down just for their Xbox division to grow. If they can afford to put nearly $70 billion on the table to buy a company to give them more exclusive games, maybe from a gamer's perspective, they could see that that money would be better spent subsidizing $10 per game, keeping that $60 price point, and more people flocking to Xbox because it's a more affordable option. But if they continue this road, if they continue increasing their prices, so increasing the price of their games, increasing the price of Game Pass, likely increasing the price of their consoles in 2023, there is a distinct lack of Xbox first-party studios releases. As I've said multiple times through this video, Halo Infinite was the last Xbox Studios game to release for the platform. And that was in 2021. That was over a year ago when I am recording this video. It has been more than a year since we have had an Xbox first-party studios release. Both of their competitors have put out at least 2 this year. In the calendar year of 2022, both Sony Playstation and Nintendo Switch have put out at least 2 exclusives per platform. But Xbox haven't. And if you're charging all of this additional money and not delivering the content, or when that content comes, that content is disappointing, alienating to existing fan bases and such, who's going to pay that money? Whereas if Microsoft used some of their capital and subsidized what they're currently doing, rather than trying to make ridiculous acquisitions that might not even go through in the end, Xbox players would be a lot better off because they would be paying less than their competitors. They would be paying less than the other platforms. And even if things are slow to come to the table, even if content is lacking or few and far between, it's justified for costing less. But when it costs the same as the competitors, and the competitors are putting out more and doing better, where then is the impetus to stay with Xbox? But what do you think, guys? That's just my 2 pennies worth on Microsoft charging $70 per game. Let me know your thoughts in the description box below. And maybe check out this other video. But until next time, have yourselves a fantastic day. And take care.